JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a series known for many things: absurd memes, an incredibly dedicated fanbase, very distinct clothing, etc. One of the things it's not known for, however, is bringing back characters from older parts, which makes sense as for the most part stories in JoJo's are self-contained. Unlike a lot of franchises nowadays, JoJo's doesn't do much fan service in the form of bringing back old characters, and when it does happen, there's a good reason, at least most of the time. While it has happened in other parts, for some reason the remaining members of the Stardust Crusaders seem to get a lot more screen time than, say, anyone in Golden Wind, and for two of them at least, it made a lot of sense. Joseph was the protagonist of Part 2, and served as a guide to the Crusaders as he knows how dangerous these adventures can get. Also, he's a surviving Joestar, so he probably needs to be back. Even if he's something of a comic relief in Part 3, he's still as helpful as they come when talking about 60-year-olds. Jotaro reappears in Part 4 in a similar role to Joseph's, where he mentors Josuke and the other members of the Morio gang. Having experience dealing with other killers, he's more mature and helps a lot more when it comes to figuring out Kira's identity. Joseph also reappears in Part 4, but he's more of a plot device to stir up conflict with his bastard son. Jotaro also comes back in Part 6, where he's more or less a plot device used to stir some conflict with a daughter he could never care for. His appearances, for the most part, are deserved as they make the plot progress, and they make sense, plus he has Joestar blood, so that's that. Finally, we have Jean-Pierre Polnareff, who reappeared in Part 5, and instead of just being a pivotal character for the entirety like the other Crusaders, Jean-Pierre just showed up during the last quarter of Golden Wind, so it begs the question, why did Araki bring back Polnareff? Which is what I'll be attempting to answer today. Hope you enjoy. Let's start off with the Polnareff in Stardust Crusaders, as before talking about his grand return in 2001, we need to establish just what made him such a compelling character. Jean-Pierre Polnareff is the third enemy stand user introduced in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 3. He's introduced as a tough, honorable Frenchman who won't back down from a duel, and after losing to Avdol, he proves himself to be such a chivalrous gentleman that the gang decide to Undertale mercy him and remove his Dio flesh bud. Polnareff is thankful for the mercy the Crusaders have shown him, and decides to join them on their journey to Egypt, revealing that he's on a quest for revenge as a mysterious man with two right hands, there was no consent, and murdered his sister, immediately showing more bloodlust than almost everyone in the group, including Jotaro, whose mother will die if they don't get to Dio in 50 days. Even after showing a darker side to him, Polnareff still displays a more playful side, flirting with random Hong Kongese women. A few stand fights later, and the gang are now in Singapore, where Polnareff is now facing off against Devo, this very bizarre, apparently Native American guy, who has this Chucky-like possessed doll. After his fight with Devo, however, he tries to interrogate the enemy before killing him, which shows his determination to finding his sister, as despite almost being set aflame by this Chucky-looking doll, he still shows some mercy instead of being completely blinded by revenge, even if he just shreds the doll after it refuses to cooperate. Even more stand fights later, and the gang are in India, where Polnareff catches a glimpse of a stand belonging to a man with two right hands. And this is where my game theory starts. Before we go on, I need to introduce a concept probably familiar to readers of the JoJo's manga. This concept being the true man's world. In short, the true man's world is the willingness to take another person's life in order to move your own life forward while creating a new path towards a certain goal. Most of the time, the true man's world is achieved in a fair Western movie-like duel, and in Part 7 this concept is introduced by the Kansas cowboy minor antagonist Ringo Road again, who tries to teach this to Gyro. When a man achieves the true man's world, they're seen with a certain flaming look in their eyes, showing their determination and need to kill. While there's no explicit flame in Polnareff's eyes during his fight against Whole Horse and Jay Guile, he still wants to fight in a relatively fair duel and is ready to kill at any point. In a scene reminiscent of Caesar and Joseph's falling out in battle tendency, Polnareff separates himself from the group in order to attack the stand user directly, instead of waiting for him to come like all the other enemies have so far. As Polnareff enters the true man's world, Avdol gets killed, and this is where the cracks start to show. He immediately realizes what he's done is wrong and begins to take responsibility for Avdol's death, which shows that the true man's world isn't meant to benefit others who aren't in it, also revealing its self-destructive capabilities, as if it wasn't for Kakyoin, Polnareff would have ended up like the weird fortune teller guy. After some motivational beating from Kakyoin, the two take a different approach when it comes to taking down Jay Guile. being more strategic instead of brute forcing it, which ends up working as Centerfold has been turned into shish kebab. Now that Polnareff has avenged his sister, he could choose to leave the group, but he opts not to, as it's kind of his fault that Avdol is dead. Somewhere in the Middle East, the Crusaders visit Avdol's father's home, as he owns a submarine, which puts Polnareff through even more grief, as the father's cold demeanor reminds the Frenchman that he is the one to blame for his son's death. This leads Jean-Pierre to the stand associated with the Judgment card, a stand that grants him 3 of his wishes, kind of like the genie from Aladdin. At first, the audience sees just how Polnareff is lost in life, as he's already achieved his main goal. Now all he wants is what any man wants, money and love, showing that when a man doesn't crave anything specific from life, he just defaults to what society would expect for him to want. When Polnareff doesn't want revenge for his sister, he's no different than the lonely guy working the night shift at the gas station. He already has everything he needs from life, so at this point he's pretty much at his highest. Or so we are led to believe, as he asked Cameo to bring his sister Chérie back to life. On a quick side note, by the way, for those of you who don't know, Jean-Pierre Polnareff is based off the singer Michel Polnareff, who has a song called Tout tout pour ma chérie, which translated to English would mean something along the lines of everything for my love. So I think it's just great that the character Jean-Pierre Polnareff is would do anything for his sister named Chérie, kind of, you know, like in the song, but instead of being a lover, it's a family member. It just comes to show that Araki does his research when he wants to make musical references. So it turns out that Polnareff will never get over his sister's death, and I know it's for realism, you know, grief just doesn't disappear like that, but I really do enjoy how consequential his sister's death is in a series where nothing seems to have lasting consequences, especially on the morale of certain characters. Now that Chérie is alive again, Polnareff doesn't question it and is ready to reconnect with her after a few years of being apart, but uh-oh, she's actually a clay zombie who ends up eating his shoulders. If that wasn't enough, Cameo also makes Polnareff's 3rd wish come true, which summons a clay zombie version of Avdol who also tries to eat him. Instead of entering the true man's world, Polnareff just gives up and has to be saved by the real Avdol, who explained this whole situation pretty well by reminding Polnareff he's still not over his sister's death, even after trying to get revenge for her got one of his friends killed. In response to this, Polnareff kills his sister's clay zombie, and even if this kill is not only a way to show that he is ready to kill the enemy stand user, it also symbolizes Polnareff freeing himself from the guilt he feels for Chérie's death, actually ending Polnareff's arc this time, as he's fully over his sister's death and has made amends with Avdol. And after all these cameo shenanigans where Polnareff has finally conquered all his issues, this is when he starts to lose everything he loved. A bit later in Egypt, the gang is then joined by Iggy, a stand user dog who Polnareff gets relatively close to. Sure, they bicker a lot, but in the end they still respect each other and would probably still be friends after all this Dio stuff is over. For the most part, the Egypt part of Stardust Crusaders is going pretty well, as Kakyoin is the only real loss the Crusaders have had, and Kakyoin's not even dead, he just has some eye scratches from the blind man in the desert who controls water, because yeah, this was definitely going to work in his favor. So the Crusaders make it to Dio's mansion in Cairo, where Polnareff is put with Iggy and Avdol while the others go to fight some gamer. The 3 of them get a very big confidence boost as they kill Keniji with relative ease. However, when Vanilla Ice shows up, Avdol immediately dies, which probably is the final nail in the coffin, as Polnareff has seen this man die twice. Once again, Polnareff enters the true man's world, but Iggy also kind of makes it in. Iggy dies, so Polnareff has to carry on the will of these 2 characters, and he is most definitely broken if he wasn't already before. Anytime Polnareff enters the true man's world, people around him will die, which is why I think that in Golden Wind later on, he doesn't really show any resolve or will, because he knows the destructive effects it will have on other people. He might be repressing a lot of things right now, but in the fight against Dio, he valiantly goes in for the kill even if it doesn't do much in the long run. Either way, he survives part 3, and between his appearances in Stardust Crusaders and Golden Wind, he moves to Italy to look for stand arrows and loses his legs and eye in the process. To sum it up, while Jojo kept his cool hat and banished the David Bowie hand fetish serial killer guy to worse hell while being surrounded by all these friendly Japanese stand users, Polnareff became Pirate Joe Swanson while trying to kill the level 35 schizophrenic mafia boss. So back to our original question, why was Polnareff brought back in the main story, besides being a plot device of course? And honestly, I think it's just a cautionary tale. My first interpretation of his return is what completing a character arc does to a character. At this point, Polnareff has acquired a stand arrowheads, he's found revenge on the man who killed his sister, he's seen Avdol twice among all his friends, and I think it's to show characters like Giorno what happens after someone loses their resolve. My second interpretation is linked, but instead of being completing a character arc, it's because Polnareff finally realizes the dangers of the true man's world, and he doesn't really want to show any will to kill anymore. He understands that what he's doing is destructive, and if he does it again, it might get some other friends killed. Therefore, he just lets days go passively as he waits for his own death. Notice how in Silver Chariot, Polnareff's stand uses the arrow. Instead of becoming Silver Chariot Requiem, it's just known as Chariot Requiem. This is an important detail, as when, for example, Gold Experience gets the arrow, it becomes Gold Experience Requiem, and Giorno can still control his stand, well, to a certain degree. In Part 3, almost every stand is named after a tarot card, and Silver Chariot is named after the Chariot card. To show that this stand is exclusive to him, he gives it a color. It's kind of like Magician's Red or Tower of Grey. So when Chariot Requiem exists, Polnareff isn't in control anymore. He has been weakened so much that he can't even control the manifestation of his soul, which serves as a cautionary tale for Giorno, as he now knows the consequences of the arrow if it falls into the wrong hands. When Polnareff thinks he's about to die, instead of thinking about the future and how Giorno will finally end Diavolo's reign, he reminisces about his past with the judgment fight, thinking about the moments in which he proved his maturity the most. He completely gives up, which should have ended his character's story. However, he became a turtle, so yeah, the Jean-Pierre Coco Jumbo is real. Can we get much higher? In conclusion, I believe Polnareff was brought back to show the readers and characters what happens after a character loses drive so early on, showing that striving for more and finding a purpose in life is necessary if you want to actually be happy and prosper. Because when you compare Part 3 Polnareff to Part 5 Polnareff, you see that the world is hard on silly men filled with a joyous whimsy. Nothing in this world is harder than being a goofy and fun-loving guy. So, yeah, that's all I had to say about everyone's favorite fictional Frenchman Jean-Pierre Polnareff. Thank you for watching, like and subscribe for more life-changing content. Goodbye.